I'm Kathryn Zox, your social worker with a microphone, and you're listening to The Kathryn Zox Show. And joining me today is Kari Zeller, author of Replaced, Answering the Call of Leadership in the Age of AI. As artificial intelligence reshapes the global economy, leaders across industries are confronting profound questions about human identity, purpose, and professional value. Kari Zeller explores this challenge through the concept of ontological vulnerability, the uncertainty that emerges when traditional sources of meaning, contribution, and career certainty are disrupted. Rather than viewing AI as a force to fear, she presents it as an invitation to intentionally redefine our roles by embracing the uniquely human qualities that technology cannot replace: wisdom, ethical judgment, presence, discernment, and the ability to create meaning. A United States Air Force combat veteran and respected executive advisor, she works with CEOs and leadership teams navigating complex transformation, strategic change, and disruption. Her perspective equips leaders to move beyond the fear of replacement and toward a future where human strengths become their greatest competitive advantage. Welcome to the show, Kari.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
It's great to have you here, and you have a lot to explain to us because we are not scientists. Okay, so
I
we
understand.
yeah, got it. Yeah. So I guess the first question, it really goes back to the beginning of my intro. Um, you're doing all this through the challenge of exploring, as I said, ontological vulnerability. So let's get into that. What does that mean?
It's like a really big question to start. I love that you started there.
Okay.
Okay, so this is a word most people aren't familiar with. And the best way to explain it is actually maybe to share some history rather than going into some philosophical dissertation, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so one of the books actually that has really stuck with me and came up for me during this whole I don't know I mean, it's not just a transition, it's like a whole new era, right?
Yeah. It's a kind of an explosion, or it feels like one.
Yeah, yeah. And it impacts every single aspect of our life. So the book that stuck with me, and I read it back in 2017, I think it's a bit older than that, was Jonathan Lehr, Radical Hope. Okay. And this is a pretty thick book to get, not thick, but a deep book to get through. But here's the thing that stuck with me. He spoke of the Crow Nation and what happened as the buffalo disappeared. So Chief Plentycoo said, when the buffalo disappeared, the hearts of my people fell to the ground and they could not lift them up again. After that, nothing happened. And he didn't mean events didn't take place. What he meant was there was no meaning. Yeah. So as I read in the book, I started to understand that the buffalo was not just sustenance or warmth, like from the hides. It held a world for them. It held ceremony and economy. It was coming of age. It was so much more than an animal to hunt. And I thought back then, I thought, well, what's our buffalo? What's our buffalo that when it falls, our way of life disappears, and a while ago I thought, well, I don't know, is it money? Is it this, idea of independent existence? Is it like, what is it? And then, and that question kind of went back into the background of my mind, and I forgot about it. And then AI, and not just AI, but all these exponential technologies, things that most of us don't even know about, right? There's like this quantum computing. What does that mean? I don't know what that means either, right? Or all these biotech things you hear about. But really it was AI that started to rock our world.
Did
And
Carrie did it start with the internet, let's say the digital age or the digital divide? Was that kind of the beginning for us?
probably that was the beginning. And there's social media, there's so many things, but those things even though they were very disruptive, they went at a pace in which humanity could keep up. And I think what's so different about this and the exponential and the convergence of all these technologies is it's infiltrating so quickly, so quickly. I mean, I had a talk yesterday that I started preparing for in November. I finished, I kind of got what I was going to do in March. And then, 2 weeks ago, I thought, well, I got to change the whole thing because this is moving so rapidly. And so here's what I've noticed, okay? AI has infiltrated our whole world. And if we're talking about the work world, and not everybody still participates in the work world, but even after retirement, people, they still talk about their work world. And I started to think, well, what is work really? It's this container in which we find our identity, we find our purpose. Kids go to school, think about who they're going to become. We find our place of belonging. We contribute, we achieve. And as AI has infiltrated our work, it's actually disrupting our place. And an ontological vulnerability is when our way of life and our kind of our place in the world is so disrupted that we can feel displaced.
So is this part of the human condition? I mean, you mentioned the buffalo that changed the
Yeah,
lives of yes,
yeah,
of a whole group of people. And this is, as you say, our buffalo. We can't do anything about it. It's here. I mean,
yeah,
because you hear a lot of people, well, we not so much now, but we have to ignore AI or get rid of AI, and that's not going to happen. So yeah,
right,
we are. Yeah,
right.
it's impossible for us to. We are vulnerable. That's it. We can't. So how are we
Yeah,
going? Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
right. And I do want to be careful because as a Western white woman living a privileged life, I
Yeah.
cannot compare this to the atrocities that happened with our indigenous population. Like, I just
Yeah.
can't. But I learned from it, right? And I wonder about it, and I go, "Ooh, what can we learn right now from different historical moments?" Right? And
Yeah.
and I do love the way that you ask this. Is this a human condition? Yeah, it is a human condition. We want to know our place in the world. We want to know, what does our future look like? Who am I in that future? What do I contribute? How does this future address what I really care about? Who am I going to become in that future? And I think that that is really a huge question for many of us.
Well, the title of your book, I think, replaced. That's what we're
Right.
afraid of, aren't we? We're
That's
terrified. Yeah.
that's right. And we're afraid of replaced as in being displaced, right? And the play on the word replace in my title is actually re dash place, re being again, to place ourselves again. And that's why the subtitle, Answering the Call of Leadership in the Age of AI. Now, leadership doesn't need to be, and it never has been for me, a position, right? I mean, people confuse leadership with the title or formal authority, uh, followers, right? But for me, leadership is saying, I have the choice to shape the future. And I'm going to make the decision to shape the future rather than having the future dictate how it goes for me. And
That is
so,
the big question. Okay.
yeah, yeah, go
Answer.
go for it.
All right. So answer that. We're all waiting. How are we going to do it? Yeah. We have to read the book. I understand that. But while I have you here, give us a synopsis of how we are going to do that.
Yeah, and I left a lot of things out of the book, but the book is a whole thing on that. There's a couple pretty important pieces to that, right? So one important piece is to really understand a couple things. My value is not my role. My value is not the tasks and activities that I do, right? So really separating what's my value as a human being and What's my value in terms of, what do I care about? What am I willing to commit to? How am I in relationship? And really centering ourselves on our own value, and then beginning to anchor the kind of life that I create for myself around not just my own value, but what is it that I fundamentally care about? So do I fundamentally care about my well-being? Do I fundamentally care about the kind of experiences and relationships that I have? Do I fundamentally care about contributing, in a way that um, I get to give my best gifts? And the work of replacement is to attune to what's shifting. What future am I committed to participating in, and beginning to navigate from that place? I know that sounds a little bit conceptual. Let me share something really maybe a lot of us have had this
Examples.
experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to go before AI, and much of my work began with just the big transitions in a person's life, right? So the big transitions in a person's life, it could be for myself, one was leaving the military. That was a big transition, right? My identity was disrupted. Well, hey, I was in the military. That I was really useful in aircraft maintenance. I don't want a career in aircraft maintenance, right?
Yeah.
Um, I belonged in the military, right? I had status, I had recognition, I had structure, I had evidence of my own competence. And now I was out in the civilian world. I didn't know that world. I had to replace myself into that world. I'll say a little bit more about that. Or becoming a parent. When I became a mother, I had a whole world where, I could go to Starbucks whenever I wanted. I could pick up and go. I could sleep in, right? I could travel the world. And then I became a mother. And that was a huge transition, right? Or with some of my initial coaching clients, I had some, even though I was young when I began, some of my coaching clients were really dealing with retirement. Here who I was, and now I'm moving into this other world of retirement in which, well, who am I now? Right? What's my use now? My mother is so fun, and she says, "Well, I don't want to just be I don't want to just knit all day." And
Yeah.
retirement was really threatening to her, right?
Yeah.
And so this work of reinvention, actually humans know how to do this. They do know how to do this. And what happens is first we have to acknowledge what's ending. So in human transition, and this also happens in organizations when big changes, restructures, or maybe, you're part of an organization that just got acquired, right? And you had one way of orienting, and all of a sudden everything changed. And you don't know who your relationships are. You don't know, your reputation is shifting. You don't know what's going to make you successful.
But what
So,
about, I want to interrupt because I want to ask this
yeah.
question. It seems to me all the examples you've given are great, and I have some myself, but the overriding umbrella is that, and I want you to obviously correct me if I'm misunderstanding this, because the overall umbrella is AI. So when you're going through, like, as you described, those transitions, being a mother, leaving the military,
Mhm,
how you do that, and like you say, you have to say goodbye to go ahead,
mhm,
is affected by AI. Will give you one of my examples a little bit. I'll just give you one of my examples. I have I have a lot of girlfriends, and we confide in each other, etc. And one of my friends is often asking me. She'll ask me stuff about medical advice, and not a doctor, a social worker, but I give advice anyway. Anyway, she asked me something about making a decision, a medical decision, and I said, "Well, let me think about this." And as I'm talking to her, I'm looking her question up on AI, and it fills in all the information
mhm.
that she hasn't given me. And she's asked me to give to help her, or to help her make a decision without giving me the information. And then so I sent her the Chat GPT information that I had. But I realized it kind of changed our relationship because I
Mhm.
can do this with any conversation. I
Mhm.
can, when someone's asking me something or telling me something, I can have access to information that I never had before that helps me respond to that person. And that's my, uh, it was I don't know what is an aha moment. What is, and it sort of affects every relationship that we have or decision that we make, right?
Yeah, it can. Was that exciting to you or unsettling?
Unsettling.
Uh-huh.
That's what, yeah, it was
Yeah.
unsettling to me.
And was it unsettling because you started to give up your own judgment or you realized everybody has access
What it,
or something else?
what the truth is that it made me feel like I trust the information that she's
Yeah.
giving to me and putting me in a position to make a decision when she doesn't have the information. It was you touched it's exact unsettling is the word. That's yeah.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I think we have this new, some people are arguing, do you want to call it intelligence or not? I find that it's an okay word. It's machine intelligence. It's not human intelligence. And I think so I'm diverting from the question of how do you make the transition, but I know we'll
Yeah.
come back to that.
Yeah.
Um, One of the most important things I think we can do is to really understand the difference between machine intelligence or artificial intelligence and human intelligence. And I think part of our future is to begin to imagine, invent, and step into a world in which we have both, and not to give up our human intelligence. And I'm going to say a little bit about the difference between the two. Uh, Machine intelligence and AI is primarily probabilistic. It identifies patterns, right? It can summarize, it can it's can compute so much, right? So it can retrieve anything that has been made explicit in writing or in language. It can compare it, it can translate it, it can cluster it into categories. It can detect some deviations, it can look at patterns, um, it can predict based on what it has and maybe some likely outcomes. It can tell you what other people are saying. It can generate some options. It can optimize. All of this, though, it's inductive, meaning that it can look across many, 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 many examples, and it can conclude based on those examples. Humans are so different. It's not that humans can't do that. It's just machine actually does that better. Human intelligence, we sense. We don't just have five senses. We have like, I don't know, 26 or enormous number of senses. They keep finding new ones, right? Even that gut sense. We sense context. We sense, we have hunches, like something's not right here. We can sense what's important in a relationship or energy shifts. We can sense what's emerging. We interpret. We don't just analyze, we interpret. We make meaning out of things. We understand history. We have tacit knowledge, meaning it's something that we only learn through experience, through making choices and living with those consequences. We can actually judge and discern what matters, what fits, what's worth pursuing. We can imagine things that have never occurred before. We can imagine possibilities, right? Our imagination and our curiosity is one of our biggest strengths. And one of the biggest things is we can commit, right? We can commit, we bear the consequences, and we can mobilize others towards that. So our knowledge is lived, it's contextual, it's historical, it's embodied. And what I see that I'm concerned about is when we move towards machine intelligence in lieu of, and we give up this human intelligence. And so the idea really where we need to begin to think from and learn and be curious is how do these two intelligences come together? For what purpose? Not just for getting an answer, but for creating and moving into a human-based future, meaning a future we design. Most of us just kind of wind up places, you know, like kind of like that, the pinball thing that goes through the pegs, right?
Yep.
Uh, what it's important to say, well, what is the outcome like if I could imagine myself, I don't know the whole situation, but with a girlfriend in a similar situation, and what I'm trying to do in that role is I'm using my understanding of her, of historical. I understand humans don't always give me everything, right? And I might say, well, let me look this up in chat. This is what chat's saying. I'm wondering, I'm not going to give up my relationship. I'm not going to give up my dialogue. I'm saying, what of this seems to fit for you? Or here's what I'm wondering about, right? Because why? I sense, I wonder, I'm curious, I understand her. I can have a sense of what she might be dealing with. Um, but I find that the machine intelligence can give me some pretty quick answers that I now can interpret, react, discern, and engage from.
That's the best answer that I've heard, that we really can understand. I mean, that's exactly what you're saying. How do
Mhm.
we use these two intelligence and how do we get them to come together?
Yeah.
Because that whole issue of being um, replaced
Yeah.
is the issue for most of us. And when you put it that way, it makes a lot of sense. We're getting more information, but it's just information. It's not in the
Mhm.
same context like you're saying that we have a lot more information, right? As an adjunct to that to the
Oh, we
AI.
do.
Yeah.
We do. And we have something else that really belongs in this conversation. Um, I would say this is probably the biggest difference is humans care. AI doesn't. Now, for most people, they're going to hear care like a feeling of affection. But it's not cares more than affection. It's the way we're involved and engaged in the world. So care is what directs our attention. Care is what directs our discernment and our judgment. Care is what has us commit to something. Care is what has us prioritize this or that, either information or activity. Care is what has us innovate. It has us put in effort. It has us take responsibility. So, care is actually what I would say at the heart of the human intelligence. And that's why I say that moving through this transition, any transition, and what leadership is fundamentally about is seeing, okay, what is it that what do I fundamentally care about? I call them our fundamental cares. I go pretty deep into that. And it's a thread through the book and through all my work. What's our fundamental care? And how do I begin to attend to that, discern from there, commit from there, prioritize, innovate, effort, take responsibility? So human care is really what's at the center of it. AI can't, it doesn't care. It cannot care, but we can. And that's the
That's a
difference.
good note. We have 2 minutes left. I could
Oh,
go on and on
so
talking to you.
fast.
Very fast. Okay, care. Um, AI doesn't care, and we do. And Kari's book, Kari Zeller is the author. I've been talking to her. Replaced, placed, Answering the Call of Leadership in the Age of AI is her new book. So, Kari, just give us platforms, more information so we can obviously,
Yes.
I'm assuming we can get the book anywhere or listen to it on Audible.
Yes, you can get it anywhere. Audible's coming out soon. I'll be recording that soon. Um, the easiest place to find me is karizeller.com, KariZeller.com. That's really easy there. I have a consulting firm, TGN Consulting, and I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. But I just really love engaging anybody in the conversation who cares about our human future and how do we integrate and make that future better with this new technology.
Well, you've definitely done that in this conversation. So if we want more, and we do want more, get the book, get Kari's book, Kari Zeller. Thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm Kathryn Zox, your social worker with a microphone, and you're listening to The Kathryn Zox Show. And joining me today is Julie Carrick Dalton. Her new book is The Forest Becomes Her. Award-winning novelist, environmental advocate, and climate communicator, Julie Carrick Dalton examines how storytelling can strengthen our connection to the natural world and motivate meaningful climate action. Inspired by the childhood loss of a cherished forest, she reflects on the personal experiences that shaped her latest novel, The Forest Becomes Her. She discusses the ties between women's lives, generations, and the landscapes they inhabit, while exploring the lasting influence of Concord's transcendentalist tradition. A former organic farmer and beekeeper, she explains why fiction often reaches people in ways scientific data alone cannot, transforming complex environmental issues into deeply human stories. And her novels have appeared on many lists from CNN, Newsweek, USA Today, and Parade. And her journalism has been featured in the Boston Globe, Business Week, Orion Magazine, and many more. Welcome to the show. Nice to have you on, Julie.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Okay, I guess I'm going to just start out. I like to kind of define things where we're at. A climate communicator. That's a word I had not heard before. So, what is a climate communicator?
I think there's probably a lot of definitions for that, but I like to think about it as someone who can translate the moment we're in time, climate data, climate information, science, statistics, into stories that connect with people on an emotional level that they can maybe see themselves in, or that they can understand in a way that they might not be able to access if they were watching just a documentary or reading, a 10,000 word article on climate science.
In other words, it's something that we don't have this unnecessary, I'm going to call it unnecessary jargon, stuff that we don't understand. I think that's one of the problems in terms of understanding climate change or accepting climate change. That's what we hear most of the time. We don't hear somebody, well, like yourself, storytelling. That's one way to help us understand climate change.
Yeah, and I think it's important because, as a species, we've evolved through storytelling. Our earliest ancestors would sit around a campfire telling stories before we had written language or science. We would talk about, what berries are poisonous and, what places are safe to hunt. We're wired to understand the world around us through story. So I tell stories that engage climate science, but first and foremost, they're human stories. You need to connect on a human level to hear anything else beyond the story.
But do you focus primarily, this is about women's lives, and then the connection, I think I mentioned this in the beginning, the connection between women's lives and the natural world?
So in this book, I do, yes, and The Forest Becomes Her. There's three main characters who are women. One is 13, one's in her 30s, and one's in her 50s, which are really important moments in the, transfiguration of living inside of a woman's body. There are three moments of, I don't even want to call them hormonal storms, of becoming a
I think
woman.
you can call them her.
Let's
That's
let's do
okay.
that. That's
Yeah.
exactly what they are.
Yeah.
So, these are really 13, mid 30s, mid 50s are important moments in the life and the body of a woman. And so I use these, internal storms that are going on, and emotional storms to connect these women to the grief the land is feeling in Concord, Massachusetts, and in the story that I'm telling. Not all of my books are just about women, but this particular story I felt really strongly about centering the transformation of women and how they connect to nature.
Yeah, you're talking about Concord, Massachusetts. I know it well. I went to Boston University. I'm from Maine, so that whole territory is very familiar to me. Um, but why did you set it in Concord, Massachusetts?
Yeah, there's several reasons actually. So I live in Boston. My children went to school in Concord, Massachusetts. So I also know it very well. And Concord has a very particular history in this country. It is, famously, has Revolutionary War, Civil War history. It's where the shot fired, heard around the world was fired. It's a stage. It was the, where the suffragist movement, abolitionist movement, the Underground Railroad, women's education, all these things were brewing in the 1860s, 60s when the transcendentalists were gathering, Emerson, Thoreau, Hawthorne, Margaret Fuller, the Alcott family. So it has this huge history. And the transcendentalist movement, which kind of started by Emerson, really centered conservation and the appreciation of nature as one of the main tenets of what they believed. And I really leaned into that idea of Concord being this this focal point of the conservation movement starting. So it's set in contemporary times, and it leans into our transcendental history. But what I did is I had this town of Concord clear cut an old growth forest in my book. And the reason I did that is I think Concord's a place that would not do this because of its conservation history. So I set the stage and made some political changes that don't exist right now in Concord to set the stage for why they would allow this old growth forest to be cut down. And the reason I did that is I think of Concord as a place this would never happen. So if it could happen there, it could happen anywhere. So those are like the many factors that led to me setting the story in Concord.
And Julie, it has happened everywhere. At least we'll talk about the United States, hasn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
how did it happen? I mean, yeah.
Well, what
yeah.
I think I mean by that is, so, if you look historically, when we came across the ocean to this continent, we clear cut the majority of the old growth forest in New England. But there are some still standing. There are still some, 400-year-old forests that exist, and we cherish them. They're different than just another forest. An old growth forest is special. It's unique. It has a different uh, structure to it. And so the fact that Concord, this storied historical town, that it would cut down an old growth forest is more egregious than just clear cutting another piece of land. But I think that if the worst thing could happen in the place that it would never happen, that should be a message that, that we need to be on a high alert that any of this could happen anywhere.
Okay, well, you've had a lot of experience, obviously, in land conservation. And so I'm obviously making the assumption that this had an impact on your book. So what are your personal experience besides your book, besides the novel, just in general, in terms of what you've been doing for the past few years, in terms of climate crisis, climate change?
Yeah, well, it goes back more than a few years. I would take it
A
all the way
lot
back
of
to,
years.
yeah, I would take it back to my childhood. I grew up, in a house surrounded by forests, and that's where I played as a kid. My friends and I ran around back there. We built forts or trails in the woods. I had a tree, like a special tree that I called the vine tree, that I used to go sit in this tree and read. It was my kind of, a refuge. It's a place I would go to be alone if I was having a bad day, to go cry. I read all my favorite books, all those, the Judy Blume books and the Lord
Yeah.
of the Rings and all those books back there.
And Julie, what about tree houses? In my day, tree houses were really, I don't know if they still are
Yeah,
or
yeah.
not. Yeah.
My grandfather built me
A
me and my
tree
cousins
house.
a tree house. Yeah, so I lived in this forest. It was really special to me. And when I was 13, I walked back into the woods one day and found crews moving in, and they had been clear cutting trees, and they cut down my tree, as well as a lot of other trees to build houses. It was obviously not land we owned. I had no right to this land, but it was a really special place to me. And it really traumatized me because it was the place I would go to seek refuge. And I really loved this forest. And I think that wound really stuck with me, and it maybe changed me in a before and after kind of way. In the way I saw nature before, I always assumed it would be there. And afterwards, I felt the need to protect it. And then, flash forward into I guess it was in my 40s, we had a family home in New Hampshire. And it was surrounded by forest again, which I loved. And we had bear, moose, and deer that would frequently walk into our yard. They still do. And this 100-acre tract of forest was on the market, and it was being clear cut and timbered. It was on the market for development, and I just had this panic. That 13-year-old girl in me kind of rose up and was like, "Don't let it happen again." So at this time, I wasn't 13. I was not, helpless. I had some resources, and I partnered with a local business, and we purchased the land and protected it, and that's where I built my farm, which I ran an organic farm for around 13 years. I sold it a few years ago, but it's still in under protection. And so we saved that piece of land, and it felt a lot like bookends to my story of losing losing a forest when I was 13 and protecting one as an adult. And those two ideas bookend this story. So it's a very personal story to me.
It's a personal story. And now, as I understand it, obviously you are a speaker, a frequent speaker, talking about the climate crisis, universities, museums, conferences, nationally and internationally. What are the different kinds of responses that you're getting, say from students, colleges, as opposed to businesses or museums?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I would say that organizations that invite me to speak on topics related to climate crisis I tend to be speaking to audiences that are very receptive to what I'm saying, but not always. Sometimes at universities in particular, I will go and I'll have people challenge some of the ideas in my books. But where I find the most pushback are in smaller venues, in book clubs. I do a lot of book club visits online and in person. And I will have people challenging me on things about, not everybody believes in climate crisis or, issues of climate immigration where they don't agree with my perspectives. And what I find is in smaller spaces, I have the opportunity to speak directly with individuals who don't agree with me, and often sometimes in these larger venues as well. But I have the opportunity to speak to people who have a different worldview or different opinion. And I think in our day and age, that's increasingly rare to be able to engage in a civil conversation with someone who doesn't agree with you and to have it as a conversation. And I center the story as my vehicle to have the conversation. It's a story about people just living their lives, having messy relationships and conflict, and center the conversation about the story of this individual. And my hope is that by engaging with the characters and story, it'll open people's minds. And I've seen that in action. I had a book reviewer once write a book review that started out, I don't like, I don't pay attention to climate change and I don't like politics in my fiction, but I really cared about the characters and the story. And by the end of the book, because I cared what happened to these characters, I now think differently about climate change. And that to me is the holy grail of what I do.
Yeah, and that's surprising to me. So when you're in these book clubs or in smaller venues, that's where you get the pushback. Do you think that's a generational thing? Because sometimes maybe this may not be true, but a lot of book clubs have maybe older generation. Uh,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think there's some of that, but I think it's regional. I have, done book clubs all over the country, in places that might not host a big lecture at a university dealing with climate crisis. I think in general, I'm speaking in August at the Citizens Climate Lobby. I recently spoke with members of the Audubon Society. I'm speaking at a science museum in September. I think these audience are prepped to hear my message. But these small pocket communities all over the country are readers. They want suspense, they want mystery, they want romance, a little love story.
Yeah.
And I can deliver all of that to them. And then I can, kind of like, hiding the vegetables. I tell them a really good story and introduce them to characters they love. And then we open up the conversation. And to me, that's where the magic happens.
You also mentioned belief in climate change, and people will say to you, or individuals say to you, I don't believe in it. What do you respond to that? Just because you don't believe it doesn't make it so. I mean, how do you deal with?
Yeah. So that is always challenging. I will, very, respectfully say, I think most scientists do believe this. I mean, there's going to be always some fringe voices, but if, 98% or 99% of experts in a field believe in one thing, I tend to listen and look at the data and the research. I read a lot. I, go to a lot of conferences and listen to experts. Um, but I also think that lived experiences are important, and I can tell them my lived experience, which sometimes matters more than citing climate data, and telling a story. So I think you can engage in these conversations respectfully without. I think if you tell someone they're wrong, and you just tell them your worldview is wrong and I'm right, you shut them out right away. Like your opportunity is gone with them. So I think that you tread carefully and respectfully and understand that sometimes you're going to disagree, and I can't change everyone's opinion, but maybe I can engage people in conversations that they wouldn't have had if they hadn't read my book.
Speaking, okay, writing a book, and I know that you teach at Drexel University Creative Writing MFA program. So, as you're teaching in the MFA program, are you introducing new writers who are going to be using storytelling to introduce climate change or change attitudes?
Yeah, actually, this is a great joy of mine is that at Drexel, I am a thesis advisor to creative writing graduate students who are writing novels, and students get to request which faculty members they want to work with on their thesis. And I often get students who specifically want to work with me because of my expertise in writing about climate and nature. So I get these students who are writing some really amazing novels that are engaging nature and climate and environmentalism in unique ways. Some of them are magical realism, some of them are in young adult stories. So I'm seeing that it's really encouraging to me to see these voices that are like on the rise, and that their books are going to be out there spreading, messages in the near future.
Yeah, which is, can we, right now, I mean, how do you think um, this belief or not believing in climate change is affected by the climate that we're now enduring, whether it's forest fires in Canada or, I happen to be in upstate New York right now, and we have flooding and all kinds of things. I mean, do you think that helps change people's attitude or perspective?
Yeah, I think when it comes for you, you believe. And it's coming for more of us. We have this home in New Hampshire, which nobody thinks of New Hampshire as the front lines of climate crisis, but
I do.
our summer temperatures have gone up by 4 degrees over the past century, which is very disproportionate to the rest of the United States. So, what does that mean to have a 4 degree temperature change in the summer? It changes our growing season by 22 days. We have a 22 days more growing season in New Hampshire. We had their plants, crops that grow here that didn't used to, crops that used to thrive that no longer do. Our maple trees, those iconic, colorful maple trees in the fall, are moving north in New England because the temperatures are too hot. And so it's coming for everybody, and at different paces. So I think people are starting to see themselves more in the climate crisis, but it's also hard to avoid the news. And I think to not believe at this point, I think, is a willful disbelief. It's a refusal to see reality and to, kind of entrenching in beliefs you've carried from your past. And I think we're seeing that it's, we're chipping away at that more and more. I think there's a lot of people who believe in climate change, but don't believe it's human caused. And that's something else I like to talk about. So I think being an artist, a writer, I have a unique opportunity to, be in rooms with people who don't necessarily share my beliefs, and being able to have conversations over areas we have a common interest, which is literature.
What about journalists? I mean, I always find, for instance, we have a tick situation, not good, right? It's proliferating here,
Hmm.
at least in the Adirondacks. And do you think that writers, journalists don't really help the public to make those kinds of connections as the world, as things warm up? We get more bugs, we get more viruses, well, all kinds of things change, as you've discussed in the interview. But do you, can't we help? We should be making more connections, just whether it's on, cable TV or national
Yeah.
TV. Yeah.
I mean, I think there are journalists doing some fantastic work. So I don't think that there could be more, but what I would like to see more of are, like, for example, this moment we're in right now with this war in Iran and the oil prices. I would love to see more stories about people who've already embraced sustainable living and how they're not being affected as much by the oil prices, or people who have electric cars, or communities that have embraced wind and solar power on a community level, about how they're being less affected by it. I think there are really great human interest stories out there that aren't being told as widely as they could be. But I do think that journalists are doing hard work. Unfortunately, journalism as an industry has been, kind of scaling back coverage across, many fields, and there aren't as many, big, outlets out there competing to cover this news. And I think we need more competition in journalism. We need more independent journalism to tell the stories from multiple points of view, because they're not just disaster stories. There are good stories out there too. They're positive, hopeful stories, and if we see more of those, I think that inspires us that all is not lost, and it gives us a reason to take action if we can see a reason for hope.
Yeah, if we see a reason for hope, and I think the word connection is like critical. We can make these kinds of connections, as you're talking about the oil in Iran and gas prices, and what we can. There are alternatives, and I mean, maybe. I think that's an important point. People are scared; they get afraid, and they get afraid when there's some kind of a catastrophe, and they kind of want to just push back and not think about it because they think they don't have other choices, other
Yeah.
options.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think showing them that there are options gives people it gives people reason to, like, if you lose all hope, you have nothing to fight for, right? If there's no hope for a better future, why bother? And I think the paralysis of grief, despair, and anger is really dangerous. And the antidote to paralysis is hope. And so we need more, whether it's fiction, whether it's visual art, a theater, journalism that's showing that there are better futures possible gives us a reason to, break out of that paralysis of despair. And I think that's really important right now.
Yeah, I think that's key, the paralysis of despair. But I still want to hone in on the fact that when you turn on the news and you're watching the news, whether on television, on your iPhone, whatever, it really focuses on the disaster and how
Yeah.
horrific it is. And then it stops there. The information stops there. And we don't hear
Yeah.
the rest of it in terms of what we've been talking about. Make a connection.
Yeah. Disasters are much sexier
Yeah.
than a story about solar panels. And we do need those stories. I just think we could use more of the hopeful stories as well. Not in a Pollyanna utopian kind of way, because I think there are real life good stories that are happening that we're not seeing enough of, to kind of balance
Practical.
out
Yeah.
to balance out the disasters. And don't get me wrong, we need to cover the disasters because people need to know what's going on and what is coming.
Well, covering the disasters is one thing, but when it sounds like a horror movie, in the way in which you're covering it, I guess
Yeah.
isn't it? I mean, yes, you need to talk about it. We need the information, but we don't need a horror story.
Yeah, and I think that fiction can be the antidote in some ways. In my novels, The Forest Becomes Her, my new novel is my third novel, and my other novels also engage some element of climate crisis, and they're all dark topics. One has to do with rising temperatures, one has to do with the loss of our pollinators and the disruption of food systems, and The Forest Becomes Her has to do with deforestation. They're all dark topics, but I write all of them through a lens of hope. I want you to show up for the story, for the characters, and to believe their hope, because I think hope's contagious. So I think there are antidotes to the horror stories that we're seeing on the news.
Yeah, you mentioned you're a beekeeper.
Yes. Yeah, so I don't have active hives right now. I moved. I live in an apartment downtown Boston. We still have a family place in New Hampshire. So I don't keep bees anymore, but so I no longer consider myself a beekeeper. I'm a bee ally now.
Former beekeeper and
Yeah.
ally. Okay,
Yeah,
go
so I
ahead.
have a very expansive pollinator garden that's all indigenous species, flowering species that support local pollinators. And I have an incredible variety of pollinators in my garden, which I'm really proud of. So I am a big advocate for the bees and for being responsible in the way we manage our own, property in terms of what we plant and what chemicals or no chemicals, preferably, that we use on our property. Beekeeping still informs everything I write, but I am now an ally, not a keeper of bees.
Okay. And how many beekeepers are there in the United States? Is it a
Oh,
big
that's a great question. Honestly, I don't know the answer to that. There are those giant corporate beekeepers that you'll see on the highway with boxes and boxes, like hundreds of thousands, or maybe not hundreds of thousands, but thousands of boxes of bees that they transport to like the almond groves in California and the blueberries in Maine, for different seasons. And then there's the hobbyist beekeepers. Then there are the small scale beekeepers that produce honey and beeswax on, in small scale. So it's a wide range. And I really don't know the number, to be perfectly honest with you, but I know that we're losing them every year in, really high numbers. And so a lot of people don't understand that the beekeeping industry, which I mean by the corporate beekeepers that have the, hundreds of thousands of hives that they truck all over the country, are actually damaging local pollinator populations because they overcompete when they bring their bees in. They outcompete the local pollinators, and they spread diseases to different populations as they move around the country. So there's, yes, we want to support our bees, but we need to be careful how we do it and not cause more harm than good.
So the ones that you're talking about that are proliferating are not good. These big, am I going to call them corporate beekeepers? Is that it?
Yeah, it's and there are better practices. I'm not saying that every large beekeeper is used, but there is a problem among these, giant corporations that they when you keep bees on a large scale, there are diseases that affect bees. So they give them antibiotics, antifungal, antiparasitic medications. And so that those populations stay pretty healthy because they're being medicated. Now they move around the country and they might be carrying diseases that aren't affecting them because of the medication, but they're spreading the diseases and leaving them behind in other local communities where the pollinators are not medicated. And so they're leaving these diseases behind. So it's actually this movement of hives around the country is actually a problem for, wild bees and other pollinators.
right, let's get back to the book because we have not actually, we're not getting back to the book per se. The Forest Becomes Her, Julie Carrick Dalton, because we have a couple minutes left. So give us more information about the book, about your lectures, and where we can
Yeah.
keep in touch with you. Yeah.
Well, The Forest Becomes Her is you can buy it in any bookstore, online or in person. You can order it from your local indie. You can find me on Instagram at Julie C. Dalton, or at my website, juliecarrickdalton.com. I love hearing from readers and other climate advocates, so feel free to reach out and say hello.
Great talking to you today. Lots of good information. There's lots more, obviously. Read the book, The Forest Becomes Her, Julie Carrick Dalton. Thanks so much for being on the show today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. I'm Kathryn Zox, your social worker with a microphone, and you've been listening to The Kathryn Zox Show.